So I would like to introduce our first panelist, who is going to talk about the idea behind the panel and share her family experience. And that's Kirsten Leong. And if you've been at other parts of the pilgrimage, you might have run into Kirsten. She's one of the organizing group for the pilgrimage. She's a Yonsei and an Amache descendant of the Samashima and Umori families. And you're going to see some pictures of those folks. She is one of the founding members of Amache Historical Society too. She updates the website amache.org and she distributes the newsletters. So Kirsten, please take it away.
So this was the overview flyover showing the sort of orientation that the landscape, there's a lot of the landscape intact. You can drive on the original roads, get a feel for a block layout, what the barracks look like, and then sort of orienting you to the website and the specific pages that will be walking you through the directory map, photo map, and under the visit section, the driving tour map and podcasts. So with respect to my family's story though, interestingly, I didn't even really know that there was a connection to Amache or the sort of main incarceration camps for a long time. And the reason for this is that my grandfather was actually, there we go. So he was actually east of this line. So basically, if you're familiar with this map, or maybe I'll orient you to this, that bold line along the West Coast for California, Oregon, Washington, everyone who was living west of that line in the exclusion area, those were the people that had to relocate, euphemism there. And my grandfather had already graduated from grad school. He went to Carnegie Tech. And so he was far enough east from that line. So he was not evacuated. In fact, he rescued his family from the camps, moved them to Pittsburgh with him. And my grandmother, although we knew that she had spent time at Santa Anita Assembly Center, she also managed to get into college at Hamline University before people were sent away to the camps. And so this was always our family's narrative. We had a way that we had escaped the camps because we were far enough east from that line. And that was reinforced by a lot of our family photos growing up, which reflected really American kinds of experiences, the red wagons, the typical sort of family photos. That I think many of you are familiar with, this sort of impetus to really show how we were good Americans, we were not the enemy. And that's really something that I think is pervasive across the Japanese American community experience, that sort of drive to really show how good Americans you are. So imagine my surprise, after my grandparents passed away in 2011, I found these photos. We were going through my grandmother's things, cleaning out her apartment. And I found these photos that very clearly say, in concentration camp, Amache. And so I held them up to my mom and aunts who were there. And I said, I thought you said grandma and grandpa were never in the camps. And they said, well, they weren't. And I said, well, what's going on with these pictures then? And they said, oh, well, Nana and great grandpa were in the camps and grandma's family. So I started looking into that a little bit more. And I think part of the reason for that is that I didn't actually interact with any of those folks. The only person who I had ever met was my great grandmother, Nana, and she didn't speak a lot of English, and it wasn't a chapter that people generally talked about very much. But as I started looking into it a little bit more, I learned about the archaeology field school with Denver University, and I happened to be living in Colorado at the time. I have an undergraduate degree in anthropology, so it just seemed like something I should get involved with and volunteer. And luckily I did, because the first year that I volunteered, which was 2012, the block that they had selected for what are called surface surveys, for sort of just scanning systematically to see the artifacts on the landscape, was block 11K. And well, one of the blocks. And that was the block that my family actually was living in. So this is the Samashima block. Along the bottom, these are some of the artifacts that we identified that were right around the barrack that they were living in. And so I'm standing in the doorway of barrack 11A, and the sort of apartment that the family was in was that end apartment there. And so on the bottom, you can see there's a Helena Curtis perfume or makeup or some sort of bottle, Japanese ceramics. So someone brought this ceramics with them. It's not the industrial things that they would have been supplied at the mess hall. And then I just put in that base of a Noxema jar because I just thought it was really indicative of the kinds of things that are really recognizable, that you still see scattered across the landscape, that give you this real sense that Amache was really lived in. This is a place that you can see the daily activities, the things that people were doing, and that's reflected in what you see along everywhere on the ground. And so being there at a time where someone can help guide you through how to see how to interpret the things that you're seeing is really, really powerful. In 2014, my mom was able to join me as well. She helped with some of the archaeology. You can see this is another of the Samashima barracks. They moved between 1943 and 1945, and we know that because there are 2 camp directories. And so this is one of the other locations where they were living. And you can also see that one of the unique features at Amache is that the way the foundations were built have these very clear demarcations for the doorways. So it's not just where was the barrack, but where was the specific doorway. And what was the view that they would have seen entering and exiting their barrack every day. And you can see the iconic water tower in the background. So in 2016, my cousins, I think Dylan has joined us. I'm not sure if anybody else has joined us in this session today. But my cousins and aunts and uncle also came for the community open house. And at that point, we had also identified where exactly on the landscape this family photo would have been taken. And we think that this was probably when my grandfather's parents moved to Amache. So this is an interesting piece that we discovered after the fact, looking through my grandfather's memoirs that he had started, but he'd only gotten up to 1960. And in that, though, he talks about how he rescued his parents from the camps, moved them to Pittsburgh with him. But then after my grandparents got married, they went down to Amache to celebrate their marriage with my grandmother's family, her parents and brothers, and then went back to Pittsburgh and told my grandfather's family about it, parents about it, and they actually petitioned to move to Amache. So it really struck me just to think about what must it have been like at the time to make the choice to prefer to be locked up and imprisoned rather than be the only Japanese people in the area where they were living, or some of the few Japanese people in that area of Pittsburgh. So that was pretty striking to me. But this is 4 generations, the 2 generations of Omoris and Samashimas that were at Amache, and then the 2 generations afterwards. In 2018, I was able to join the community open house again. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it out there because I had moved to Hawaii at that point. But for that open house, there was such a large turnout that we actually had to have separate tours of the family barracks. And it turns out there were 3 families. So we had the west side and the east side of Amache tour. And on the west side, we had 3 families that were actually in Block 10E, which is where that picture was taken. So the Onos, and Gary's another panelist who you'll hear from in a little bit, and the Kitajimas, and Ken Kitajima, actually you'll hear from in the closing ceremony as well, and then myself. And when Ken was showing us where his barrack was, his family's barrack, it was down the way a little bit from where my great-grandparents were, but then he sort of walked across the way and said, oh, and this is where my uncle's barrack was. And he told us the number and we found the doorway, and he stood in that barrack, and I looked at him, and then I went and I stood in my great-grandparents' barrack, and I said, well, this is where my great-grandparents were. And we realized their doorways opened directly on each other. So they would have seen each other every day. They must have known each other. So these are some of the kinds of connections that we can get by being able to engage with the place, engage with the community in that place as well, that are some of the really cool, really powerful things. Oh, I forgot to mention that this group photo that was taken where we're doing Scouts Honor, because in Block 10E, the recreation hall was used as the Boy Scouts headquarters. So that was a pretty special location within the site of Amache as well. So just to end with a sense of this is the community that was there for the community open house. And it was, again, a pretty large gathering. I think the next time we're able to gather in person for something that like this will be really powerful, because I know a lot of people were planning to come in 2020. And I think now the next one will be even more special since we haven't been able to be there for a while. So that's it for me. And I guess I will stop sharing so we can move on to the next.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, for that wonderful introduction to your experience and to this panel. And so I'd like to invite Gary Ono is going to be the panelist that we're going to get to hear from next. Gary is a Sansei who was a little boy at Amache and who now resides in the Little Tokyo area of Los Angeles. And he is a volunteer photographer for the nearby Japanese American National Museum, for which he's written a number of online articles, including the article about Jack Morrow that was discussed in the session before this one. And so I believe April's going to put a link into the chat for Gary's page for Discover Nikkei, and then you can, that way you could check out some of his articles. But Gary is going to now show us, talk about his experience out at Amache and his history there. So thank you so much, Gary.
This picture I chose to start because it shows where us kids gathered a lot between our barracks in the 10E area that Kirsten talked about. If you look far in the distance, you can see an open area and a building. That's the Amache High School. So some of my earlier memories are walking across that field with my uncle, and then hanging out with all the kids in the block 10E, which were mostly from Central Valley, Livingston. That's where Jack Morrow's family was from, or his wife's family. It was from Livingston, and Turlock and Cortez. My family, the Onos, were in San Francisco, and when the war broke out, we would have ended up in Topaz if we stayed in the city, but we decided to move. My uncles probably decided that we should move inland to get away from the evacuation zone. So we went to Cortez near Turlock, and that's how we ended up in Amache. Person on the left is my maternal grandmother, Owai Okamura. And on the right is my auntie Yuki. She played a big role in helping take care of us kids, because my mother ended up with tuberculosis. So we were quarantined and separated. It was kind of like this pandemic. My mother was in Boulder, Colorado, and us kids were sent back to Amache and divided up. There was my brother Stanley, my sister Sandy, and then my brother Victor, who was just born, basically, 1 month old. So we were divided up. And so there's one article I wrote that's called Separation Anxiety. And I believe now, as I read and reread my own writing, that, yeah, we did go through some anxieties, because on my report card in preschool in Amache, my teacher wrote that Gary is afraid of dogs and he cries a lot. And he would cry often when his brother would cry. So anyway, I talked to my brother and he said, no, he didn't remember crying. But we were separated from my mother for half a year. And it was about late 45 or early 45 that my mother recovered and was released back to Amache. So we were reunited. This is my grandson on the left, on next to Bonnie Clark, and I'm on the right. She recruited me for her first field study program in 2008. We got to see her work crew, graduate students, and other people from Denver University, faculty, 2 graduate students. There's April on the right. She's part of today's program. And anyway, during that 2008 program, Denver University had a had to host a museum opening. So they all drove back to Denver to host the museum tour for the Japanese American National Museum conference that they were holding. And I asked if I could stay behind, and were given permission. And my grandson and I pitched the tent right on the Barrack 6 block 10E site. So you see us standing there. And we spent 4th of July evening sleeping there. If you get a chance to read Amache Night, my essay about that evening, yeah, we were wondering about, yeah, Independence Day, how ironic it was that we were there spending the evening in a concentration camp, and how it must have been for the incarcerees who were all in Amache. But anyway, okay, well, anyway, that's one of many. There's other essays that if you find Amache Night, you can find other articles I wrote about Amache. And today, my daughter, and I think Chava's here, or is he visit? Okay, but if he wants to say anything, he's perfectly welcome to.
Hey. Yeah, so I'm Gary's other grandson. Yeah, Chava, or Salvador Valdez, I don't know. Yeah, he my grandfather brought me to the site first when I was, I believe, 14, where I got to meet Dr. Clark and Dr. Camp Whitaker. And it's been great to be able to be involved in the project pretty continuously since.
Thank you so much for sharing, Chava. Oh wait, we got a picture.
That's Chava. This was taken by Bonnie, I think. That was a sign that showed the picture of my uncle's funeral. But right in the background, you can see the water tower and you can see the guard tower. So that's a pretty key picture for getting oriented to finding your way around Amache. And
a great example for people who haven't been out there of what the signs look like.
Here's my daughter and granddaughter, and there's Chava on the end, experiencing shifting the sand from the excavation they were conducting. And that's how they find small objects. So my daughter Lisa and my granddaughter Solana were able to visit while Chava was working that summer. Thank you so much, Gary. And again, we're going to have a chance for more sort of to discuss. So if you have questions about that experience for Gary or Kirsten, our last panelist, and unfortunately, if you noticed, we were planning to have another panelist, and she's had to drop out because of some family obligations, and so we're going to move on to our final panelist, who is Tami Suzuki, and Tami's a librarian and archivist with the San Francisco Public Library. And she was born in Turlock, where Gary was just talking about, and to Frank and Marion Suzuki. And she's a Sansei whose father was an Amache incarceree. And you're going to get to hear a little bit more of Tami's story. She is joining us from on the road. So she will be here for Q&A, as well as her daughter Ricky, who is also featured in the video. But because she is dialing in from the road, she kindly prepared a video, and so I'm going to share that with you all.
My name is Tami Suzuki. My pronouns are she, her. My daughters have both participated in the University of Denver Amache archaeology digs, and I have made 2 visits. My father, Frank Toshio Suzuki, and his parents and younger siblings were among those incarcerated at the Grenada concentration camp, also known as Amache. Frank was a veterinary science student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo when war with Japan broke out. In 2010, at the age of 88, he was awarded an honorary diploma. My sisters and I grew up with our parents, Suzuki grandparents, and other Nikkei in Merced County, California, in the Cressy colony settled by San Francisco businessman Kyotaro Abiko. Our parents shared stories of their incarceration and resettlement with us. We took camping trips across the West. We asked about visiting our parents' former camps, Amache and Topaz, but Dad had little interest then, and we left it at that. Mom and Dad did attend camp reunions in their 60s and 70s to socialize with other Nisei. These were happy occasions. My Issei grandparents did not live to witness the congressional hearings on what was called the wartime relocation and internment of civilians. But my children's Nisei grandparents received the presidential apology, a step in being made whole. My younger daughter, Tomi, wrote of being shocked upon becoming cognizant of her family's history. She said, "At the time, I wondered what it felt like to be in my grandparents' and great-grandparents' shoes. Why would Japanese Americans be punished for something they couldn't control? What was life in camp like for them? Is this country safe for all Americans?" She continued, "I was raised to know this history, American history, and to make sure the Constitution is always honored. When I first visited Amache in 2014, I was amazed to see how the people of Amache turned this barren land into a place they could almost call home, with an ofuro, sumo ring, and the cooperative store where my grandfather sold supplies. I was able to put my hands on the soil where my ancestors walked, worked, prayed, and played while imprisoned." My older daughter, Ricky, recently wrote, "In June of 2004, 61 years after the incarceration, my grandmother spoke to the graduates of Oakland Technical High School, stating, 'I implore you to actively work for peace and justice for everyone.' Ricky commented, 'All my life, my family has instilled in me the importance of speaking out against injustice to protect our fragile civil liberties. Today, my grandmother's impassioned words resonate with me as I hope to seek justice for those at the margins through my work and actions.'" In her college senior thesis, Ricky wrote of the great psychological and racial trauma experienced by imprisoned Japanese Americans during World War II, and of baseball providing a coping mechanism. This, combined with other coping mechanisms, demonstrates the broad concepts of psychological resilience and mental toughness that Japanese and Japanese American incarcerees employed throughout their detainment. My father told a story of attempting to retrieve an errant baseball that had breached the barbed wire boundary and being threatened by the young soldier if he crossed the boundary. When the soldier dozed off, Dad retrieved the ball and play resumed. Thankfully, Dad avoided reprimand. Hearing these stories, some not shared until funerals, has helped us understand our people's lived experiences as well as our generational trauma. Making the pilgrimages, hearing recollections from other Amachians, and observing the research being conducted by the DU students has further aided my understanding of the injustices committed by this country against its citizens. Being in community with former incarcerees and their descendants also reinforced our connections. Knowing this history helps us heal as Japanese Americans and as a country, and should inform how we move forward. All of this imbues us with a commitment to affirm all people and work to uphold life, liberty, and the pursuit of justice. This can mean acknowledging our privileges and personal biases and unlearning harmful ones. It can mean taking action against immigration detention and police racial violence. I believe it means providing slavery reparations and land repatriation to Native Americans. The pilgrimages can lead us to a healthier, more just place for all.
Thank you so much for that. So that's the conclusion of the panel section. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to hold off on a little Q&A while we show off some of the resources. So again, hopefully you got a taste from all of those panels about what it's like to experience the site if you are able to come to a pilgrimage, but especially also participating as you know, as volunteers or visiting the Amache open houses. We know that, of course, we'd love to have people join us, and we hope that some of you might be interested in doing that in 2022 when we return. But we also wanted to give you an opportunity to see what some of the resources are so that you can better understand what is, so that you can sort of explore the site virtually as well as in person. So I hope that you all probably in a number of ways have seen links to the Amache.org website that is maintained by the Amache Historical Society too, and primarily actually Kirsten Leong. So a round of applause for Kirsten for all the work that she's done on this. So the first resource that I want to show you is, you can find it under the Find and Share Stories, and that's the Amache Interactive Directory Map. So this is an effort that is part of our work at Amache to, you know, one of the things that is, as an archaeologist, so rarely do we get to connect people and places in such an explicit way that we can at Amache. And that's in part because there are these two directories that were created, one in 1943 and one in 1945. And so they have a list of all of the people who lived at those times. And granted, some people showed up and were gone before the directory. And then others were in one directory, but not another. But we did take those two snapshots. We created a digital database, and then we double checked that. And this is something we're continuing to add now with the final accountability rosters. But what we're going to show you is based on those 1943 and 1945 directories, then overlaid on top of this wonderful digital imagery that was created by my colleague Jim Casey in conjunction with SenseFly, which is a drone company. And so they volunteered. They volunteered the drones, and Jim volunteered his time to make these beautiful digital images. And so that's going to be what you're going to see underneath that. And then we use this mapping data that we actually gathered from the original, starting with the original archaeological survey that happened way back in 2003. And those folks kindly gave to me all the information about where the Barrack foundations were, which we used as to kind of the start, and then we kind of layer in all of this information. So here is to get to the interactive directory. And so what we're going to do is we're going to show you when it comes on, you get a splash page here. It tells you it's for educational use only. We don't want anybody to profit from this. So this kind of comes up, and then you hit the OK button. And then you come in, and right here is where you put a name or unit number. So we are going to, with his permission, we're going to do Gary. So here's Gary. You can see there's multiple Garys, but here's Gary Ono in the 1943 camp directory. So even little kids are in here. So, but you have to know that it's the name that was in the directory. So it might be, you know, like sometimes it's a nickname. It's often, somebody might show up with their Japanese name or their American name. So that is something to keep in mind. And as much as we've really tried to clean these up, there might be some misspellings of people's names. So if you know someone was there and you think that they should be in a directory, you might want to try some and they don't show up. You might want to try some alternate spellings or a different name. So we're going to go with Gary. So what it's going to do is, so we are in block 10E. There's the Boy Scouts. There's the mess hall. And oops, I got into the wrong, I ticked away. Here, we'll do this again, sorry. It's always when you're trying to demonstrate to somebody that you, but the Okamura, that's your family, right, Gary?
Yes, that's my aunt.
So, so 6B is the rest of the Okamura family, but I somehow when I ticked in, I lost Gary. So we'll do Gary one more time. There we go. So unfortunately it zooms back out for us. So.
Well, in 1945, my brother and I were in the care of my grandmother, and she was in 6D, two doors from my aunt.
Okay, yeah, so you can see here, so as I'm zooming in, and so hopefully that you can see what underneath is the aerial imagery, so you can see the actual foundations, but then we've overlaid this sort of the template of the different rooms. And so you can see that Gary was in room 6D, and then if you click on this caret here, you get to a little bit of the more information that was in the directory. So that the head of household was Sam, and then again, the 1943 address, and then there's a 1945 address. But again, as Gary pointed out, that his family was gone by then. And so that's why Gary's not in the 1945 directory. So it just has the 1943. And then if you close this out, then you'll be back into the this imagery. And I want to just zoom out a little bit to point out something that Gary talked about. So again, is that picture that was taken, so you can kind of think about what was the view from, and again, if the recreation hall in that block was used for something other than just a rec hall, like it was the Boy Scouts or it was a church or something, that's going to show up on this map. So you can kind of see that. But if you think about that picture that Gary took, that showed us of him playing with his kite, and it went back to the high school. So again, here's where the footprint of the high school was. And you can see underneath that there are still some of the concrete foundations for the high school, although most of them are gone. But again, the view from the view to the east from Gary's barrack was through the ball fields here and over to the high school, which is reflected in that photo that he shared. So the next thing I want to go to is the photo map. So we're going to go back to here to the amache.org and find and share stories, and we're going to go to the Amache photo map. So the Amache photo map page is again, you can browse or contribute to this photo map. And this was, again, something that was put together using our digital imagery, but it was put together by Jim Casey, and I do want to acknowledge all of his hard work on this. So this is something, even if you can't visit in person, you can be contributing. So you can go explore the map. So if you hit this button that says explore, it's going to bring you to some of the images that are available. So if we go over here, you can, so knowing we were just over near Gary's barrack, which is next to the Boy Scout headquarters, right? So you can tick on this picture and it's going to show you a bit of the detail, or you can zoom in and see a little bit more. So again, that photo, wow, that did something weird. So that is the location where that photograph was taken. And then if I go up here, this is the photo that Kirsten showed in her slide presentation. So here, and then if you tick it, you can see, if you press that button, then you'll be able to see the photograph. And so what I wanted to show you is how we would, see this button right here that says contribute a photograph. So I'm gonna get rid of this thumbnail video because it's in my way. So here it says contribute your photo. And you can just continue as guest. And so you drag and drop, or you click to so I'm going to just drag and drop here from my file. So now you can see there's Gary's photo that he just showed us of the family and him and his kite with the high school in the background. So Gary, what should we call this?
Kids, 10 kids playing between the barracks. I used this photograph in another essay describing my discovering that I am in the picture flying a kite. You could call it kite flying. Can you see it? There's a little
Yeah, I can.
artifact in the sky, and that's me running towards the group.
Well, I think we can add that. So in the description, so we'll keep the title as 10 kids playing between barracks 5 and 6. And then in description, we can say Gary Ono contributed this photo himself flying a kite at Amache. Approximately when, Gary? It's probably good to put the year in here.
Yeah. And the babysitter is Margaret Masuoka. She today is Margaret Murakami. But anyway, yeah, she's the sister of a lot of my uncles. She had about five brothers.
Well, and
she was the only girl.
And Gary makes a good point is that if you are going to describe it, you know, as many people as you can include names. At Amache, what's the year, give or take, Gary?
Yeah, I would just roughly guess what, 40, late 43, early 44. You want me to work with you after this program? You know, with naming?
Well, I think we're pretty close.
Okay.
And the nice thing is we can go. I think we can go in and edit it. So now we've got it in here. So here's the locate me. No, I don't want to do that. I'm going to find on map. Sorry.
10. I would say between barracks 6 and 5.
Yeah. So here's barracks 6 and 5, which we know because we were just looking on the directory. Right. And it was right around the middle of the barrack, right?
Right.
About, okay, wonderful. So we've got it on the right location, we've got the photo, and now we accept terms and submit.
And for anyone who's considering using this, you know, if you are uploading images or doing anything with these maps and you have technical issues, you can always contact Bonnie or Jim Casey with the University of Denver, and we can come in and help and fix things. So yes, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Clearly, we do it too.
I want to go to one other feature here. That is where it says visit. So we have visitor information. There's information about the pilgrimage, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the driving tour and podcasts. So if you are, so again, the camp directory map and the photo map are good things for you to sort of prepare for a visit. Especially, I would suggest to you, if you're going to come and you have looked up some things in that camp directory map, that you could do a screenshot or create a map of that you can take with you. But this is the, so you see the Amache entrance. Again, the solid lines are the road you can drive on. The dotted lines sort of differentiate between different blocks, but they are not drivable roads. But the reconstructed guard tower and the reconstructed barrack and rec hall are now on this, and Kirsten actually just updated this so you can see where the reconstructed buildings are. And then this is the driving tour that has the signs that talk about different aspects, but there's also a podcast. And so this podcast, you can hear people reading and talking. If you tick on this while you're on the website, you can actually hear the podcast for the different sites, but there's a driving tour that you can have for an MP3 player, or you can burn it to a CD. So if you are planning on going to the site and you wanted to do the driving tour, I would suggest you do it beforehand, because there's often not good, like internet access right like out on site. There's not a wireless hotspot or anything out there. Sometimes you can hardly even get cell phone coverage. So we would recommend that you download that ahead of time. We also want to talk about, we've created a new document called Suggestions for Visitors. And this is just to sort of think about timing of if you're thinking about visiting, and suggestions about, how ways to prepare, what to bring, the fact, some of the logistics about being on site, because it is still an undeveloped parcel of land. And so, for example, there's not a public restroom out there, and we want people to be aware of those issues. And if you go out into the out there are, so even though you've looked this up in the directory potentially of where your family is, there are no block markers out there. And so if you really want to get to where you're going, we recommend that you plan on coming when there is an event. So it's a great reason to come to next year's pilgrimage, or to come during our DU community open house, which, as Kirsten talked about, is that we roll in barracks and tours to other parts of the camp. And Kirsten says the website drop downs don't all work well in browsers, and it was created before smartphones. So we're working on that. So, but just something to keep in mind. And so if you would like to go at some other time, you can reach out to John Hopper through the amache.org website to schedule a personal tour. But John he's also the principal of a high school. This is not his job. And so we do like to, he's very, very generous with his time. But if you can try to schedule your visits when there are community events, that's less of a load on him. But he is always, he and his students, although right now there are COVID restrictions, so that's something to keep in mind in terms of if you want to schedule a visit, for example, this summer.